Hello. Welcome to yoga. My name is Sarah, and I'm so glad that you're here. This practice is inspired by one word, actually, and it's all about the ordinary. And why I'm drawing from the ordinary is inspired by the Book of Mormon. In chapters 6 through 11 of Ether. And these chapters offer a lot. There's a lot of information, definitely things that guide us towards the light of Christ and things that don't. And in all of this information and all of these different things within, I wanted to focus very specifically in this practice today on something that's mentioned twice in these chapters. And the first time it's mentioned is in Ether chapter 6, verse 30. And it's talking about Oriah, who did walk humbly before the Lord and did remember how great things the Lord had done. And then we fast forward one chapter later, 7 verse 27, and it says, in the days of Shul, he remembered the great things that the Lord had done for his fathers in bringing them across the great deep into the promised land. And as a short recap, these guys are living years after the brother of Jared has taken people across from one land to another, and he did it through building a unique boat called a barge, and he did that through guidance of the Lord. And so these two leaders are years and years after, and they're choosing in their time to continue humbly before the Lord and to remember the things that the Lord had done. And likewise, as I said, Shul is remembering the great things the Lord had done for his fathers and looking back on that. And in reading these, I was just really struck with the word great, because when we look up the word great in the dictionary, great actually means beyond the ordinary. And I think it's so easy for us to kind of hear that or think about that and think that great also has to be magnificent or huge or, just so moving and so changing from what exists in our day-to-day life that it has to be just this extreme. And while I do know and firmly believe that those things do come of the Lord in the time that they need to, I also am a huge believer in the Lord's wisdom of teaching us how the ordinary can actually be seen as extraordinary, and that those ordinary movements that are woven into everyday life and everyday things can feel extraordinary on a very personal level, and that those become our great things. And one way that I draw this perspective is through reading and studying kind of things of the past in combination with how that speaks to today. And I wanted to share a little bit of that. It's going to feel a little book clubby before we start the practice. I'll try to keep it brief. But at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, my husband and I started reading from this book. And this is volume 2. There's actually a first volume, and this is the second volume of Saints. And it's a beautifully woven together of so many ordinary moments that are truly extraordinary, especially when we take them in perspective of looking how those moments developed time over time with years passing. Another thing that we've been studying together this year has been early American history. We're doing it with the kids, and we're also doing it individually. And some books that we have just loved drinking in the information from are the ones by Tim Ballard. And I have 3 of them right here. There's the Lincoln Hypothesis, the Washington Hypothesis, and the Pilgrim Hypothesis. And I just share these because within each of these, we hear about Lincoln, we hear about Washington, the founding fathers, and we think of them in extraordinary ways, right? But so much of their work was in ordinary moments. And particularly with the Pilgrims, those who came across the Mayflower, yeah, it was an extraordinary thing that they did, but it happened through so many ordinary moments that they just chose to rely on the Lord in. And they weren't rosy, and they weren't easy by any means. So just some beautiful wisdom that we've been finding there. And the last one I want to share before we delve into our ordinary focused practice is this book, and it's called I'll just hold it up so you can kind of see it. I've loved reading these words, and I'll just read this passage. It's called Make the Ordinary Come Alive. It says, and this is centered towards parenting, so all these insights that William Martin has taken is kind of translating it into like a parent thinking form. So while this applies for that, I think it also can apply for us individually. But it's titled Make the Ordinary Come Alive. Do not ask your children to strive. Do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Such striving may seem admirable, but it is a way of foolishness. Help them instead to find the wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes, apples, and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand. And make the ordinary come alive for them. The extraordinary will take care of itself. And I really believe that the great things and seeing the great things of the Lord so often in our lives can be in those ordinary moments that become extraordinary. So with our practice today, we are taking some poses that often feel very ordinary, and we will just explore them a little more intentionally with the idea of finding the extraordinary on the mat and then taking that with us off the mat into this week. So we'll begin in mountain pose, which a lot of times is kind of like one of those poses that often feels rushed through or skipped a little bit. But the value of mountain pose is incredible because we can take it with us anytime, anywhere, especially in our everyday life off the mat. So let's get rooted and grounded in mountain pose, which is essentially what mountain pose is. When we think of those mountains, right, they ground us, but they also enable us to look up. And so in that space and place, take those feet and just lift the toes, lower those toes back down, lift the heels, bring them back down, take your feet over to the far edges and then center them back up, and then press into the balls of those feet and then come right back to center. And we'll notice we have 5 points of our feet. So we have the outer edge, the heel, the ball of the foot, the toes, and then that 5th point is the arch. And we allow that arch to lift in mountain pose. Even though it's not visual, you can't see it happening. That lifting sensation with soft knees immediately creates our mula bandha, or engages through those lower abdominal pelvic floor regions and also into those lower abdominals. From there, we continue working upward, and a lot of times our spine will have a natural curve, and we use mountain pose to realign that spine, drawing the shoulders over the hips, easy on the ribs and body, and then letting the hands extend to either side, releasing those shoulders. And a beautiful way to take that is just rounding those shoulders down and back. All right, and then we bring that head in alignment. And when we've put all of those alignment places into our body, now we just stand and we breathe. We expand into the breath. Most of us breathe with about 20 to 30% of our oxygen, and most of us breathe in our upper chest. So maybe even if we look in a mirror, that breathing is a big rise and fall, like I'm showing you right now. But let's take ourselves in this mountain pose and ground ourselves with the yoga breath, beginning with the belly. So we inhale, the belly expands away from the spine. We inhale through the ribs, We inhale through the chest, and then we exhale chest, ribs, back into the belly. Again, inhale belly. Expand those ribs, open the chest, and then exhale from the chest, the ribs, back into the belly. And just in these 2 breaths, I'm already noticing my spine starting to lift a little bit straighter. I'm noticing that I was probably sitting in that mode of only using a little bit of my breath. I can feel some elongation happening in my neck, some softening in the face muscles. So just pay attention to those sensations as we slow that breath. We bring it intentional. Breathing is another tool that feels incredibly ordinary because we do it without thinking. But intentional breath work can be extraordinary for cleansing, for processing emotions, and allowing those emotions to travel through us rather than staying stuck. Intentional breath can clear our minds and focus us back to the present moment. Beautiful. Now, if you're not already there, come to the top of your mat and circle sweep those arms. Inhale along towards the sky. Exhale, big swan dive. We're bending those knees as much as we need, especially as the body's still awakening. Inhale, half lift. And then exhale, plant the hands and bend those knees. So we're coming to a tabletop position. And again, in our practice today, we're really focusing on the ordinary. We're digging into those poses and places that we might use as a warm-up or pass through and really see the value of just soaking them in exactly as they are. So this tabletop pose, yoga is a movement of the spine. Everything we do in yoga originates from the spine, and that's a beautiful place for that energy and that flow. And a wonderful grounding space for that spine is in cat and cow. So we inhale long, exhale, rounding through cat. And let's stay in cat for a moment. Just feel that sensation, opening between both of the shoulder blades, as if someone were helping to expand our upper back. Notice how the head gently falls in line. Notice how the belly engages. And then really we release, flattening those toes, inhaling and finding ourselves in cow. And again, staying in this space, knowing the curvature of the spine is in that mid to upper back. The lower back does have a slight curve, but it's just there for the ride. That's not the focus. The head, again, just falls in alignment. For most of us, it'll be looking out along the horizon. Beautiful. And then let's take an exhale, releasing. And inhaling back to cow. Exhaling, finding that cat. Just opening ourselves up to really expanding in what may seem like an ordinary yoga movement. And notice how extraordinary it is to be able to move that spine, how extraordinary it is to be in this tabletop position. Maybe how extraordinary it is to see and hear and feel those things that surround you in this moment. Beautiful, centering up to tabletop. From here, we'll transition to downward facing dog. Extending those hands slightly forward, curling the toes under, lifting those hips. We actually own a dog, and I love seeing him do his downward dog and upward dogs naturally every morning. It reminds me, oh, what a gift. So downward facing dog is extraordinary for so many reasons. It really shifts our perspective of looking at things differently. Sometimes it can literally, as we turn our bodies upside down, also bring our thoughts, reframing them in a different way. But a few things to watch for in downward facing dog to really feel the value of this ordinary pose in maybe an extraordinary way is to check in on a few things. And number one, check in with the hand placement. Widen those fingertips and put the pressure in the whole palm. It's not sitting in the base of the palm, but all of those fingertips as if they're delving into sand. And then notice, I've got long sleeves on right now, but just notice if we're looking at those wrists and there's a bunch of wrinkles in the backs of our wrists, that's our body telling us to readjust. And we readjust a few ways. Most of us will need to bend the knees in order to take those wrinkles away from the backs of the hands. As we remove those wrinkles, we'll naturally notice how our head becomes in alignment between those biceps. So we can feel ear to ear in alignment with those biceps, as if somebody were grabbing us at the hips and helping peel those tailbones towards the sky. Now, for some of us, we may extend those legs from here. We might not. It doesn't matter. Those heels may or may not touch the floor. It doesn't matter. What we look for first is that extension in the spine. And as we are inverted, meaning that our head is below the heart, we're feeling lots of sensations with that blood flow having to work differently than it does in everyday life. That process is extraordinary, how the body actually knows what to do and how to do it. It is just beautiful. From here, let's lift those heels up towards the sky. Gentle transition through plank, lowering back to those knees and coming back to child's pose. Again, another pose that oftentimes is considered so ordinary. But if we feel this pose, and I offer to you today to take this space where we have the big toes together and then draw the knees as wide as you feel comfortable. From there, extend the body forward, really leading with that heart and letting the hands come to a place that feels comfortable for your body today. For me, that is bending at the elbows and letting my head rest on those palms. But we're releasing those shoulders away from the ears. And we're just noticing, again, the spine. What's happening here? What's happening with the lower back? What sensations are going on in the body? Notice what comes up in the mind as we're in what may be considered an ordinary pose. Is the mind trying to push us further, make things more challenging? Is the mind telling us just to stop because we need more or to do more? But what if we just questioned all of that? What if we just got really good at just feeling the feelings in this exact moment, rather than trying to move them, rather than trying to mold them into something different? What if we just opened ourselves up and just breathed in that here and now? Because as we get that, work through that discomfort when we're on the mat of wanting to go and change and challenge, when we let go of that discomfort and we also practice just being, we open ourselves to finding that off of the mat. Maybe those ordinary transitions, those ordinary routines. It'll loosen things up for our minds, seeing them in a different and extraordinary way. From here, walking those hands back up. We've been in child's pose for a little while, and that can really speak to our backs. Sometimes it can be talking a little bit. So I just want to offer to you again, finding that cat and cow sensation for just a moment. Curling those toes under, lifting those hips, and again coming to downward facing dog, and then walking those toes forward to our last ordinary pose of today before we get into our last moments of meditation, which is right here. It's forward fold. And again, forward fold, maybe those hands are resting on the thighs, maybe they're resting on the shins, maybe they're draping elbow to elbow. Maybe we take those hands and tuck them underneath the toes. Any of these is available to you. And again, you'll see my knees are quite bent in this forward fold, which is just fine. That's where my body wants to be right here in this moment. And as I'm extending through the backs of those legs, I'm just noticing how much my spine is trying to pull away from my legs. I want to offer my spine to lengthen and really hinge from those hips, dropping down and releasing. And that means keeping a knee bend, which I will hold today. But find that in your body. Find that ordinary hinge. And maybe it's taking an adjustment with those arms. But notice the stillness. And again, in that inverted state where we have the head below the heart. Maybe closing the eyes. And continuing to breathe on purpose. With this breath, we should notice some sensations happening through the body. Oftentimes, our brain will be telling us to get out of this pose, get away from it, because we do experience some discomfort. But as long as there's no shooting pain, sharp pinches, pressures, or pains, maybe we do feel a bit of a tingling sensation, you can work with that. Always be mindful of your body and what it truly is calling you to do. Listen to that. This can be a beautiful reminder for our minds that sometimes breathing discomfort, feeling that discomfort, is just part of our day's journey. Nothing's gone wrong. In fact, it's quite extraordinary to feel that feeling, to recognize it, to breathe through it, and release it. From here, we gently reach halfway up. So we're just lengthening through that spine, half lift. And then we'll exhale and come down to a seated position, any way that works for you. If you're like me, you've got a little bit of tingling happening in those legs. That head has been hinged over for some time, so be easy with yourself. And in these last few moments, we will just breathe in that space. Inhaling and exhaling, taking a moment to think back in your last 24 hours. In what way have you seen those great things from the Lord? In what ways has Christ offered his hand and opportunity for you? And now think forward into these next 24 hours. And think with intention of what ordinary moment you know is ahead. And I offer to you that when that ordinary moment comes, whether it's driving somewhere, whether it's a household task, when that ordinary moment comes, allow yourself to breathe into it a little differently. To ask what might be extraordinary with this moment. And as you soak in that ordinary, we soak in the extraordinary. It takes care of itself. My last offering in this breath before we close our practice today is with remembering. And think back of someone in your family history, your family line, whose ordinary actions somehow resulted in you being in the very moment and space and place that you are now. Not directly, of course, but line upon line, little by little, their ordinary choices led you to maybe living in the country that you live in now, maybe led you to change and grow in whatever way that is for you. And as you're remembering, I have two last invitations in our practice today, maybe taking those hands to your heart as I speak these last two. The first is, if you notice in your mind that those ideas of a family history don't call to you, they don't connect with you, there are tools available to find more, and familysearch.org is a beautiful place to start. Also, before I speak again in next week's video, I wanted to offer an invitation to listen from my church leader. His name is Russell Nilsson, and I invite you to listen to his words of hope and love, because he speaks through the voice of the Lord. I know that in my heart. The light within me honors the light within you. Namaste. Have a wonderful week, friends, and we will see you next week.